Did you know it's illegal to climb a tree in Toronto? It's illegal. This dude got a ticket for like $325 for climbing a tree. That's crazy. Right? Do you know it's illegal to wear a fake mustache in an Alabama church? Did you know that's a legit law? You can't wear a fake mustache in an Alabama church because it'll be, what did they say? Distracting. So, because it causes people to laugh. I don't know why you would want to wear a fake mustache in church. I don't know why this is a law, but this is a law. What about this one? Do you know that it's illegal to build a sandcastle in Spain? So if you're on a beach in Spain, you can't build a sandcastle. And if your kid does, guess what? You get fined. That's crazy. This is probably my favorite. It's illegal for your chicken to cross the road in Georgia. Seriously. Your chickens cannot be on the loose, which means they can't cross the road in Georgia. That's crazy. What about moms? You know, sometimes growing up, we have the crazy mom rules. Anybody had a crazy mom rule? You know, if your mom's present, feel free to leave your hand down, right? But a friend of mine, my wife was saying that in her house, she couldn't chew gum in the house. So if you walked through the door chewing gum, her mom would yell at you, like, what, are you, a cow or something? Spit that out. You could not chew gum in the house. I don't know why. For me, I remember growing up when I was really young, my mother didn't let us watch any regular TV. So we couldn't watch Channel 9 or Channel 11 or anything. We could only watch Channel 38. That's it. Gospel Bill. It is ingrained in my head. Gospel Bill. That's it. And this one guy on Facebook, somebody asked a question, you know, about crazy mom rules, and he said he wasn't allowed to open the refrigerator without shoes on. I don't know. Sounds like a broken family to me. No, I'm just playing. But rules are not uncommon to us, right? I mean, we don't like them. You know, none of us are like super giddy about following them, but they're important. And so sometimes if we have this preconceived notion about laws and rules, we may project that onto the Ten Commandments and automatically see this as bad. Or see this as to limitations to me not having a free life. And it couldn't be farthest from the truth. And so this morning we're going to attempt to open up the Word and talk about these 10 words. But first we have to understand why God would say them. So I want to talk to us about the right way of approaching this series. It's going to be a long series, 10 weeks past this, so 11 weeks in total. And so we kind of need to zoom out, all right? So when we think about the 10 Commandments, what happens, you know, is given to us through Moses in Exodus chapter 20. But we're going to kind of zoom out, right, to the larger picture of humanity and creation. And it starts with this: a people born from a promise. A people born from a promise. I'm talking about Abraham. Now in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, I'm not sure if it's going to be on the screen, but if you want to just jot that down, we're going to be kind of going through a couple of passages here. But Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.'" So after, the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, right? Adam and Eve are taken out, and here comes a descendant named Abram. And God makes this promise to Abraham. It is really the beginning of this redemption story where God is bringing man back to him. And it starts with this promise that he made to Abraham. That you will be great, and your descendants will be great, and all the world will be blessed through you. I will make you a great nation, is what he says. And Abraham, who believed God, it says that he believed God and it was accredited to him as righteousness, he eventually and miraculously gave birth through his wife to a baby boy. His name was Isaac. And Isaac would give birth to Jacob, and Jacob would have 12 sons. And the second to the last son, his name was Joseph. Who here knows the story of Joseph? Anybody? Great, I get to tell you. So Joseph was kind of an arrogant little runt. He was He was the second youngest, and he had this dream, and he thought he was hot stuff, and his brothers got kind of tired of him, and so they plotted to kill him. But instead, they sold him into slavery, and they lied to their father about it, told their father that he was dead when really they had sold him. And Joseph had a hard life, sold into slavery, lied against, but eventually he rose to this place where he was second in command under Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. And it was almost like God had placed him there, because he did. And then we kind of know the famous story of when Joseph's brothers, right? There was a famine in the land, and so Joseph's father sent his brothers to Egypt, not knowing that they were sending him to their younger brother, who they had sold into slavery. And then there's this whole reuniting there. And at the end of that, it was really difficult. But Joseph forgives his brothers, and he tells them, it wasn't you that sent me here, but God that sent me here, that I may basically be able to save many lives. It was this beautiful moment, right? Because this is really, this was a rough situation because of this famine, because of this real reality in the world. The family that God had made this promise to were on the verge of dying. They were starving. And through this interaction, God keeps his promise. And he invites his father, who he gets to be reunited with, and his brothers. And there was about 70 or 80 of them, and they come into Egypt. They come into Egypt to live. And this all happens right at the end of the book of Genesis. Now there's a gap, right? There's this promise, people born of a promise, and about 400 years happens from the end of Genesis to the beginning of Exodus. 400 years, and in that 400-year time, 70 to 80 people turn into about 2 million people. And Israel, which is what they were called, their father Jacob was changed, his name was changed to Israel, about 2 million people. And this is where the next part, so when we think big, right, we're kind of stepping out. There was a people born of a promise, and now we move into God's people are enslaved. Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 14 says, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land.' Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel, so they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service, in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves." So 400 years goes by. Joseph is gone. But his legacy is still there. The promise of God making them into a great nation is still alive. But they're slaves. The new Pharaoh says, "Joseph who? I don't care about that. I care about me." And guess what? There's all these people, free labor. Great, we're going to put them to work, and I'm going to have them work for me. Why? Because they were afraid that they were so big that they might overtake them. So they enslaved them. He saw them as property. Now, this wasn't enslavement like, working a minimum wage job in America, okay? This was terrible, brutal enslavement. They beat you. They treated you as worthless. They worked you till you collapsed. And when they were done with you, or you were no more useful, they discarded you as nothing. They didn't care for your family, for your wife, for your children. God only knows the things that could have happened and probably did. Slaves, God's promise people enslaved. And they begin to cry out to God. You ever been in a place where you've been so broken, so overwhelmed that your cry to God is nothing short of almost pathetic? I mean, this is what I imagine it was like. They cry out to God, and God hears them. And the next part of this story is God lovingly sends a deliverer. In Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, it says, afterward Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh. So God sends Moses, right, to come and free the Israelites. But in order to do that, he had to go to Pharaoh and basically say, hey, king, God says you're not really God, and you need to let his people go. All right? So this is kind of what happens here. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. So Moses is sent to confront Pharaoh that he would release God's people, but release them for what? This is important. He tells him right there, he says, let my people go that they may go and make a feast for me, right? That they may come and worship me. Because see, they were slaves. They were not free. They were not free to worship God the way that me and you right now, and even you watching online, can worship God. They were enslaved. They did not have control over their own lives. But they cry out to God, and then they finally hear Moses come and say his famous line, let my people go, right? I almost sang the whole song. I was thinking about it, but I decided not to. So Pharaoh says, no way, I don't know your God. He's nothing to me. I'm not going to do that. Moses warns him, hey, you should really listen because my God's going to flex on you if you don't, right? And Pharaoh calls his bluff, says, I don't think he is. And there goes a series of plagues that happen where God uses Moses in a mighty way to show these miracles, right? And the last one, which finally broke Pharaoh's back, was when God sent the angel of death to come and take the firstborn life of every household, except for those who had lamb's blood painted on their doorposts or their doorways. And that night, Pharaoh's oldest son died. He died. This 10th plague. He finally had enough, and he tells Moses, get your people and get out of here. Go. So they left in a hurry. But it also says that they took whatever they wanted. They basically plundered Egypt and left, which is great. And this leads me to the next point, which is this. There was a freedom won by a watching father. A freedom won by a watching father. Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 and 42. Says, the time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of watching by the Lord, to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So this same night is a night of watching kept to the Lord by all the people of Israel throughout their generations. I would imagine it probably didn't make sense to their ears. To the Israelites, to Israel. It probably didn't make sense to them, right? I mean, slavery was all they knew. They were born as slaves, their parents were slaves, their grandparents were slaves, 430 years. And then they hear these words they had never heard before. You are free. I could imagine it didn't resonate, like excited, but I don't know what that means. I don't know what that's like. What am I supposed to do? Right? It's kind of like when you hear, you are pregnant. Right? You're super excited and you're like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do we do here? Right? Mom's taking you back to those days. So they go. They leave. They leave Egypt. And this is all leading up to the Ten Commandments, all right? So we're kind of taking a big picture, stepping back and looking at a big picture here. They were people born of a promise. They were enslaved. God sends a deliverer. And there was a victory won by a watching, loving Father. And they leave. They leave Egypt. And it only took a few weeks for Moses to remember that they were born slaves, and so that means they think like slaves and they act like slaves. What do I mean by that? And well, they left in a hurry, right? They were in a rush. It didn't take long for them to be walking in the desert that was hot, right, and dry and wandering, and they run out of food, and then guess what? They start complaining. And when I read this, you kind of just want to grab all of them and just go, just one good one. Like, how could you fix your mouth to say this? But they had been freed from slavery and oppression, but because it was hot and because it was hard, they were like, man, at least if we could have gone back to Egypt, at least, they would have gave us meat like that one time. And they were crying, whining about going back to Egypt, going back to slavery. How many of you know that sometimes even though we're freed, sometimes it's so easy to go back to the thing that entangles us? Why are we prone to do that? I don't know. But it's true. The epitome of a freed person who thinks like a slave, right here. They have been freed from slavery and oppression, but because it was hot, because it was dry and difficult, their institutionalized minds fixed their mouths to say something against the God who had delivered them. And this complaining gave birth and led to all sorts of sins, and it kind of got out of hand. In fact, when Moses, which we're kind of coming up to the Ten Commandments here, even as Moses is on the top of the mountain hearing from God, as God is writing these commands on stone tablets, his people are down there worshiping a golden calf, making idols, and getting into all kinds of sins. They were a freed people, acclaimed people by God. He said, they're mine, living as slaves still. And then we get to Exodus chapter 20, where a father's heart speaks. Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 and 2. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Moses coming down the mountain, seeing the Israelites acting a fool, is kind of like when Dad comes home, right? Dad comes home and he walks in the house and he sees it just in turmoil, right? Kids are screaming. The furniture's pushed everywhere. Your wife looks like she went through a car wash backwards, right? And she's giving you the look like, you better do something, right? Help me. So what does Dad do? Well, if you're in my house, you sit them all on the sofa and you lay down the law. Right? Like if, not my kids, but, every once in a while they may say something that is disrespectful to the mother, and I'll say, hey, you're crazy if you think you're going to talk to my wife like that. You lay down the law. They got out of pocket, you lay down the law. But you do it because you love them. You don't do it because you hate them. And that's how we should understand these 10 words that are written in these stones. God had made a promise. There was this plan of redemption that he was unfolding. And his children were enslaved, they were broken, they were in need, and God sends a deliverer to free them from slavery and oppression. And yet, even though they're free, they still act out, thinking and living like slaves, going back to things that God had delivered them from. And in essence, God is having this couch talk with us. Hey, because you're my child, this is what you're going to do. Because I love you, because you're mine, because I redeemed you. And he says it very clearly right here. Before he gives these 10 commands, he says, I am the Lord your God. I am the one that brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. I am the one that has saved you. This morning, hear those words, not from an angry father who is angry with you and is trying to ruin your life with rules. He is saying this from a father's perspective who gave everything to save you. See, we too were slaves to sin. And God the Father sent a deliverer in the person of Jesus Christ, who came and died for our sins, and he rescued us from literally the pit of hell. But how many of you know that even though we're saved, even though we've been redeemed, we can still act like fools? We can act like we're not free. We can act like we're still in bondage. And we so easily run to these things, or these people, or these relationships, or these toys, or whatever it is. And over the next 10 weeks, we're going to be having this discussion as God speaks to us. He speaks to us as a father does to children that he loves, that he gave everything to redeem and save, who aren't slaves, but are actually free. And these commandments help us to live the life that God wants us to live.